almost as if it had now lost the remaining little leftover of its sanity for good. That's a weird sentence. Hey everyone, my name is Christoph Jakob, I'm a music composer for video games, and today let's check out a very special tune from Splatoon 3's single-player campaign. I'd like to give you a little spoiler warning at this point though, because I'm going to talk about, and as you're probably used to by now, also show gameplay of where exactly the following tune is playing. So if you don't want to be spoiled, it's probably better to come back to this video at a later point. But if you're still here, let's take a deep dive into the final boss theme of Splatoon 3. Let's go! Sounds like Salmon Run music. Doesn't sound like final boss music at all. The first phase of this tune starts with an epic and triumphant, yet at the same time incredibly silly and awkward fanfare-like opening. It actually reminds me of the final boss music from the first installment, which also started with these orchestral hits. Admittedly, that one sounded a lot more serious and threatening to me though. Especially compared to what we have here. This little broken intro alone is already a hint that who or what you're about to face is probably quite odd. As someone who has spent way too much time playing Salmon Run in Splatoon 2, and also Splatoon 3, it was anything but difficult to recognize this little motif that you can hear right after the opening. It's actually a variation of the tune Happy Little Workers from Splatoon 2. The Salmon Run lobby music from that game, if you so will. In Splatoon 3, they seem to have replaced this tune by something that sounds similar, familiar, yet actually quite different. Both tunes contain the Happy Little Workers leitmotif though. It goes something like this. The original leitmotif is a little lower than what we have here, and also has a few different notes. Besides, there's actually no real harmony in the melodic line of the original. Harmony basically just means hearing more than just one note at the same time. One note can never be harmony, but as soon as you have multiple different notes, there is harmony. In the final boss theme of Splatoon 3, there's an additional descending melodic line though, which I assume is just there to make it a little more interesting sounding. As if things are about to go down. I try to recreate it. It's different overall, yet still quite easily identifiable as the Happy Little Workers leitmotif. And that's what a motif is all about after all. On that note, let me quickly explain what a leitmotif or motif actually is. According to the Oxford Languages Dictionary, a leitmotif is a recurrent theme throughout a musical or literary composition associated with a particular person, idea, or situation. For the context of video game music, I've kinda made up my own little definition over the years. A leitmotif is a recurring sequence of notes, chords, or entire sections that is tied to a specific character, location, event, setting, or a combination of these elements. Oftentimes, leitmotifs are short and simple, which usually makes them easier to use and spread across a soundtrack, while still remaining recognizable. That's by no means a rule or anything like that though, as Happy Little Workers perfectly demonstrates here. You hear this admittedly quite long sequence of notes and you instantly think, hey, that's Salmon Run, or hey, that's Mr. Grizz. What is going on with the rhythm? This sounds horrible. That xylophone was pretty funny. I don't even know what to say. Oh. Oh. This leitmotif thingy is falling apart. That is cool. Rhythmically, this is probably the most disturbing piece of music on the entire soundtrack. Whether you're making use of dissonant chords, odd time signatures, or random and chaotic samples and elements, as you hear them in Salmon Run a lot, I'd say there's nothing that sounds as disturbing as drums that are offbeat the entire time. The more you keep listening to this tune though, the more you might notice that it's actually not the drums that are off. Since the majority of the instruments that are coming in at a later point are somewhat in line with what the drums are playing, it's actually the Happy Little Workers jingle thingy that is pretty much soaring aimlessly through musical space. The only other instrument that is rhythmically adhering to what this little jingle thingy is doing is this humanoid, not bing, not bang, but more like boom voice sample. Pretty much regardless of what the other instruments are doing, this leitmotif and all that's associated with it is just staying consistent. It's too stubborn to pay any attention to what the other instruments are doing. This leads to quite some musical chaos. I'm not sure if you noticed, but after roughly a minute, this little consistent jingle thingy turns into completely random, almost out of tune sound. Almost as if it had now lost the remaining little leftover of its sanity for good. That is a weird sentence. I don't even know what to say. Oh. I always have to laugh about this part that starts roughly 40 seconds in. You can hear mallet instruments primarily on your left ear. Sounds like a xylophone and something like a celeste to me. Both instruments seem to be trying to provide something to make the music a little more interesting overall. Yet they appear to be having issues following along to the rhythm of the music. And I can't blame them. Until eventually they pretty much just give up after 10 seconds. It even sounds a little to me as if the person that was playing the xylophone was just rage quitting. I'm so glad that the offbeat is gone. You can hear and also feel that it's starting to get a little more serious. Once the second phase of this tune kicks in, the offbeat is gone entirely, and so is the leitmotif I was talking about the entire time. I mean, the motif is obviously still there. It's even emphasized by this humanoid vocal thingy, as well as some wobbly synths. But the main instrument that had been used up to this point with this motif in it is not really in the music anymore. What was once just ridiculous and silly is slowly turning into something at least a little more threatening. The orchestral hits that are now joining the music help there, as they manage to convey a sense of urgency. The second half of phase 2, however, is much more intimidating than what we have heard so far, at least in my opinion. This slowly rising melody is building up tension. There's a low bass instrument in the background that is playing the exact same thing as the melody, but 4 times as fast, and thus 4 times as often, outlining a so-called diminished chord. Most of you probably know major chords, which tend to sound happy without context, and minor chords, which tend to sound rather sad and melancholic without context. I think the best single word to describe how a diminished chord feels like would be odd. Depending on the context of the music, they can be part of an emotional chord progression. Oftentimes, they even just simply serve as a transition to the next major or minor chord. But in this tune here, it's pretty much just there and staying on this diminished chord because it sounds odd and makes you feel uncomfortable in a way. Oh yes. They really managed to turn this little overly happy thingy into this. There's a choir. This is fantastic. Honestly, I love this. Phase 3 shows that, given the right circumstances, you can really turn the most happy and joyful sounding motif into something grand and epic, or something menacing. A single voice is now supporting the main BOM melody, with more and more voices and an entire choir joining in as the music goes on. Cinematic strings and orchestral hits, which are very prominent and in your face now, are putting the leitmotif into harmonic context pretty much for the first time. Ironically enough, every single chord in this first half of phase 3 is a major chord. That's why earlier I said that major chords tend to sound happy without context. No one would say, "Oh, this sounds so funny and joyful" here now, right? I'd say it's definitely more on the positive side though. Almost as if the music is starting to cheer you on now. That you can do it. You can be victorious in the end. This little interlude, which is easily my favorite part about this entire piece of music. Is in perfect contrast to the other half of phase 3. It sounds serious, it sounds heavy, it sounds edgy, it sounds hairy? Personally, I think the music still sounds like a huge parody of itself though. Despite everything, it still has an overall goofy and silly tone to it, which is honestly perfect for a game like this. But yeah, if you're watching this, you're probably familiar where this tune plays and how you got to this place in the first place. Place. So it wouldn't really make sense to have overly dramatic and serious music here. Writing music for video games is all about context. Just to demonstrate you what I mean by that, let's watch a short part of gameplay of this final boss fight, but instead of the actual music, I've put final boss music underneath that I have written for a different game, which fits the context of that game perfectly, but it would feel completely out of place in a context like this. Thanks so much for watching. If you'd like to see more videos like this, you can click here. In case you'd like to listen to my own little Splatoon inspired album, you can click here. And here is another pretty weird Splatoon 3 tune that I've already made a video on. See you next time.